Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week I continue my series on Exalted 3rd Edition by talking about the systems and mechanics. This week I'm going to be focusing on the core systems and combat mechanics. Next week I'm going to talk about character creation. Yes, I know I normally do those in one video. When I was preparing for this one, I realized there was a lot to cover. So rather than try to cram it all into one video and make it really, really long, I decided I would split it up and do this an extra week of Exalted. So, with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the systems and mechanics of Exalted. Exalted is, of course, a descendant of the storyteller system. So, it uses the same basic mechanic of you roll a number of dice equal to your skill plus your attribute, and then you count up the number of successes. This one has a static difficulty level. 7, 8, 9, and 10 are always successes. Anything else is always a failure. 10s count as 2 successes. So this game doesn't have exploding 10s. How I miss those. If you roll no successes, if you have no successes on your test, and you get any 1s, that is a botch, which means bad things happen. Now, the big thing that separates Exalted from other storyteller-based games is stunts. You see, Exalted is a game about larger-than-life heroes or villains. So, this is a world where just going, I hit him with my sword, doesn't cut it. This is a world where you're going to say, I jump over the terrestrial Exalted, and as I land, swing my sword into his back. You know, that sort of thing. You want to be big, you want to be flamboyant. And you get rewards for doing this. There are 3 tiers of stunts. 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point. 1 point is, well, it's a stunt. It's something that meets the 2 criteria of stunts. That it is not boring, and that it is cooler than a basic description of what you're doing. Not boring does kind of mean you don't want the stunt description to be so long, people just kind of stop paying attention. And you don't want to keep doing the same stunt over and over. So, that's the big things for not boring. And then, of course, it has to be cooler than the basic description. A 1 point stunt is pretty much just, it's a stunt. 1 point stunts give you, like all stunts, give you 2 rolled dice. If it is a static value that you're stunting, like defense, you get an increase of 1 to your defense value, or whatever static value you're talking about. 2 point stunts, you're probably only going to see one of these in a scene. These are the things that basically get the GM or a couple players at the table to just go, wow, that's cool. And they're rarer than 1 point stunts. But the big thing with the 2 point stunts is they give you 2 rolled dice like all stunts, and 1 automatic success. 3-point stunts, though. These are the things that you talk about after the session. Literally, 3-point stunts, you're probably only going to see one of a session. And these are the things that everyone at the table gets impressed by, especially if you pull it off. And might even, if you're playing in a public venue, draw appreciative response from passersby. These give the most of any stunt. First, they give you the 2 rolled dice, like all stunts. Second, they give you 2 successes. If this is a static value, it raises that static value by 3. And finally, you gain 2 temporary points of willpower. These can go above your normal permanent willpower. It means that, of course, you have to use them by the end of the session, but... And the big thing about stunts is, of course, rating 2 and 3 stunts can't botch. Because they have automatic successes, they can't botch. Because there are successes. And then you can do unnecessarily dangerous stunts, like jumping through a fire to attack someone. And whether the stunt succeeds or fails, you should not punish the player. Or you should not punish the character. You want to encourage players to do crazy things. So, in the case of jumping through a fire, they fail to do that, but they're able to brush off the flames before anything happens. That sort of thing. And stunts, the main purpose of stunts is to always let players do something cool. Now, there's one other thing about stunts. You can use stunts to do things beyond just those bonuses. Many martial arts, you can stunt into doing lethal damage instead of bashing damage. In theory, you can also do this with the gigantic hammers some Exalted use. I have no idea why a hammer that weighs 100 pounds only does bashing damage when it hits. I just don't get it, but somehow it does. Somehow it's not doing lethal damage by, shattering your ribs. But that's beside the point. But speaking of combat, let's move into talking about how combat works, because this is one of the more interesting elements of the system. What makes Exalted's combat interesting is how initiative works. Alright, initiative starts off with a join battle roll. So when you start a fight, or when you're poisoned, you make a join battle roll. Join battle is wits plus your awareness, and then you tally up the successes and add 3. This is your starting initiative. Now, there's 2 types of attacks in Exalted. There are Withering Attacks and there are Decisive Attacks. Withering Attacks, they don't do damage to the character. They lower the character's initiative and raise yours by the same amount of damage you did. Now, what happens is when a character's initiative drops to 0, they enter a state called initiative crash. They have hardness 0, so they have no way to resist decisive attacks. They cannot launch a decisive attack. They can't use charms with the perilous keyword. And they can still be subject to withering attacks. If your initiative is at 0 or lower, you can still keep being driven into negative initiative even further, and the people who hit you get their initiative raised higher. Thus, it is encouraged that if a storyteller realizes a NPC in initiative crash is just going to keep giving free initiative, that this character has no hope of getting back up into positive initiative, guess what? The storyteller should declare that character defeated the next time they suffer a successful withering attack. And the big thing, if a character survives 3 consecutive turns spent in initiative crash, their initiative resets to 3 at the beginning of the next turn. If a character enters initiative crash as a result of his own actions, he immediately loses another 5 initiative. Alright, so that's what initiative does. That's the importance of initiative. Basically, it's to determine when you act, but it's also to determine when you hit initiative crash. Now, once you've hit initiative crash, it's generally pretty much all over. Because at that point, someone's going to launch a decisive attack on you. But what are withering attacks? What are decisive attacks? Withering attacks are those attacks that one makes in a fight that are drawing the opponent's weaknesses out. They're tiring them. They're overextending them. They're doing something. They're not meant to win the fight. They're meant to enable those later blows. And when you make an attack roll, it's you have to beat your opponent's defense, but soak, which is your stamina plus any values of armor granted by what you have, are reducing the amount of damage you take. There's no rolling to soak. There's not really rolling for damage anymore. It's kind of fast-paced, a little bit fast-paced like that. In Withering Attacks, Decisive Attacks are actually dice pools. And a decisive attack, your dice pool is based on your skills, attributes, and your initiative. Because you spend a portion of your initiative adding dice to this decisive attack. And what you roll determines the amount of damage you are doing. Then your target subtracts their hardness, which is generally granted by armor and some charms, from your damage. And then you roll your damage. Every success inflicts 1 wound level. And the big deal with this is these are the killing blows. These are the things that will defeat your foe by leaving them a corpse. And that is where the purpose of a decisive attack is. There's a number of other things like moving and all that. That's just kind of normal part of combat. But you get 1 attack every time you get to act. And you're going to generally be opening up with Withering Attacks until you get a high value of initiative. And then you're going to launch a decisive attack. And the purpose of that decisive attack is to decide the fight, to end the fight. And that is combat in a nutshell for Exalted 3rd Edition. Next week, I will be talking about character creation. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.